circumstance to catch up with someone, but it was good to, it's really good to catch up with him again.
He's been fun to chat with. He's back in Lawrence this weekend for a series of events with the journalism program.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he was, what was it, the Black Hawk was the Davenport Central newsletter, and Mr. Ball was the teacher advisor for the Black Hawk.
Ross, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. If this goes the full hour, I have to jet out about 10 of.
Okay.
Long schedule appointment. Okay.
All right, so I won't take that as a sign or.
Just begin live. So the video is live. There's no audio yet. So just let me know.
Okay. All right. I'll just tell you before we go live here. I'll introduce you briefly. I will let you, tell us about yourself. That'll be sort of the first question.
Okay.
And we will go around the room and introduce ourselves for the camera, and then I'll just jump right in.
Sure.
And then you guys, I'll ask just a couple of questions, and then jump in as you'd like. I've got a list here, so any questions you want to ask. So, all right, I'm ready. You ready?
I'm ready.
I'm Cathy Glasson, the opinion editor at the Register, and we're here for an interview with Ross Wilburn. He is one of 6 candidates for the Democratic nomination for governor. The winner of the June 5 primary will face Republican Governor Kim Reynolds in November. Mr. Wilburn, welcome to the Register.
Thank you. So good to be here.
In the room with me are Register editors and reporters. Let's go around and introduce ourselves, please.
Brianne Fahnensteel, politics reporter.
Carol Hunter, executive editor.
Mike Troutman, Investigations Enterprise Editor.
All right, and Mr. Wilburn, take it away. Just tell us about yourself and, in particular, your background and what qualifies you for governor.
Sure, and do you want me looking at you or the camera?
However, yeah, we can just talk. Don't worry about the camera.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Ross Wilburn, and I've been in Ames for the past 3.5 years, working for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. That was when I started with Extension. They contacted me and invited me to apply for a position, my current position. I was at the Iowa City Community School District as they call it equity officer, but it's not home equity. It's essentially diversity officer, which is half of the position of what I'm doing right now. So I was in Iowa City for 34 years about. I went there for college, University of Iowa, got a degree in social work. I have a master's in social work. And I taught at the University of Iowa School of Social Work as a visiting instructor for 3 years. I ran the Quad Cities Graduate Center. I worked at a place called United Action for Youth as a youth counselor for 9.5 years, working with teenagers and their parents on some mental health issues, but community youth development opportunities for the young people. I worked for the Crisis Center of Johnson County. I was the executive director, and I had about 8 or 9 full-time paid staff and over 300 volunteers that helped operate the crisis staff hotline and walk-in counseling, as well as a food bank. So that's kind of the background. I am running a campaign with the theme of Let's Be Iowa. Let's work together to create opportunities for all Iowans to have an opportunity to make a living here in the state of Iowa. So that cuts across strengthening rural and urban economies, strengthening up our environment, creating a welcoming opportunity for Iowans, regardless of your background, who you are, and it's taking a look at a lot of different issues out there, but I'll kind of stop there.
You told us a lot about your background, but I just want to redirect the second part of the question, which is, why do you think you're qualified to be governor of Iowa?
Well, I ran through all of those things because I think what I bring to the table is just a breadth of experience. We've got a great slate of candidates in the Democratic Party, and they all have a lane, whether it's healthcare or law or labor. And I have worked for private nonprofits. I've run a small business. I have worked in education, both K-12 and post-secondary education. I've served in the Iowa Army National Guard for 6 years. I've got family members. So just drawing upon those different experiences, the theme, if I were to look at it, is community and giving back to the community through all of the professions that I've had and all of the volunteer work that I do, even straight through here at Iowa State Extension and Outreach in terms of being the diversity officer, but also working in community and economic development. And that's kind of the strengthening rural and urban economies.
What do you think is the most urgent problem facing Iowa right now? And if you were governor, what would you do about it?
The most urgent problem is mental health care, but I'm going to layer that with K-12 education and funding K-12 education at a level that's going to be appropriate so that it's sustainable, they are able to plan, so that we are supporting teachers and at a way that they can make a living here in Iowa, so that we're not sending folks to or having them choose to go to other states where they could make a better living in terms of benefits and jobs. But even in Iowa, you know, the larger school districts can pay a larger salary and may have better benefits as we go along. The mental health piece aligns with that because young people can't learn if they are showing up at school with mental health issues or if they're hungry. And so that support for young people, it's the foundation for the next generation. It's the foundation for that next generation that's going to take of older Iowans when they get into different professions, whether it's medical, whether it's some of the trades, and supporting housing opportunities for people of all walks of life. I think that providing that support for education gives us a launching point into several of the issues. Having young people that are prepared for the jobs of the future, having young people, they are already concerned about the environment. Clean air and clean water has been a theme throughout the campaign, so I think that is the place to focus a lot of energy and effort, and that will set us up and prepare us better for the future.
Let's go through some of these issues that you just mentioned. The legislature passed some bills this year unanimously, which was amazing, aimed at filling some of the gaps in Iowa's mental health services. But I think everybody acknowledged that it was just a start. So right. Specifically, what would you do next dealing with mental health?
We need some providers here in the state, and so part of that is looking, is there a way to try incentivize or change the relationship between the governor's office and our health care providers and mental health care providers, reversing the privatization of Medicaid right from the beginning. That was done without any advance notice. It wasn't part of a campaign theme. It happened, no hearings, and that is a start for providers to be able to make a living doing the thing that they love, supporting Iowans. So that's a component of it. I think another component relates to a potential future education thing. We have the critical need now, but we're going to have the need in the future. And so maybe we can do a program like the state of Tennessee does, where if you are an adult and you don't have a post-secondary degree, and after other forms of grants and scholarships, then we pick up the rest of your tuition costs for school if you commit to living in the state of Iowa for 2 years, and let's target it towards an issue like mental health care. If you're willing to go into mental health care professions, the budget is tight right now, but as a target investment, maybe that's a place that we can start. Those are a couple things that I would do, but I think also just fundamentally changing the relationship between the governor's office, not having these out-of-state managers looking with the Medicaid circumstance, and incentivize our health and mental health folks to keep people well.
Let's stick with Medicaid for just a
Sure.
second, because the reason that the governor's office went to managed care in the first place was the unpredictable nature of Medicaid spending. It blew up a hole in the budget just about every year because nobody knew exactly how much the spending was going to be. They wanted to try to control that by moving risk off to the private managers. So how do you address that core problem of unpredictable spending if you go back to state management?
Great question, and the other piece to that was sold as tax saving, as cost saving, and by definition, by the nature of a private entity, who in some cases, many cases, are going to make more money and salary than someone in the governmental institution. So where is the savings going to come? There are certain conditions if you are using Medicaid for services that a yearly review with delays in receiving services someone that is a quadriplegic and utilizes a wheelchair and support services. They're going to need those support services. So one, just initially take a realistic look at we are going to pay for the cost of services through Medicaid. We can try and do it proactively, we can do it reactively, and trying to strengthen oversight within government, whether that's by task force or board or commission. That's another way. Try and work with our representatives in DC and elect people in that position that are going to free up the opportunity for states to try and work together. Is there, if we are allowed to partner with Minnesota or any other nearby states that would be willing to help increase the risk pool, that's a potential. To try and put in a moving away from Medicaid to Medicare for all, or a single payer option, is another potential collaboration to help spread risk. Those are some things that we take a look at.
Well, let me ask you about Medicare for All, because some of your fellow candidates have suggested a Medicare for All program in Iowa, whether or not the federal government participates. Would you be in favor of Medicare for All if Iowa went it alone, and how would you pay for that?
That's potentially something that we could also put to the voters. Several states have done that, and they've had difficulty in trying to get it in place. I'd be willing to take a look at it. I think that would be ideal. The question comes at the cost and the risk pool, but I think at least starting with a single payer option for those that are, for example, their employer's not paying for their insurance, and they make more money than, they're not poor, so they're not on Medicaid. So that's something I'd be willing to take a look at.
What is something that Governor Kim Reynolds has done that you actually agree with?
Well, I agree with the recent attempts at trying to address mental health care. One could look at it as where has she been? It's not, it didn't come out of a vacuum. We don't have enough providers here in the state, but that's an attempt. I think some of the attempts at looking at STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and an opportunity for those post-secondary supports and programs. The problem with that is if we've been shortchanging K-12 education and young people aren't getting the knowledge to be prepared to take advantage of those programs once they graduate from high school and are looking at community college or four-year college. Those are challenges, but the effort in those areas I support.
And since I asked you for praise for your opponent, your Republican opponent, what do you think has been her biggest mistake?
Well, the transition, continuing some of the Governor Branstad legacies, closing down the mental health care centers. That happened during the transition, I believe. There.
Would you reopen those?
I would. I think we can try and perhaps strengthen some oversight and provide some flexibility in terms of supports that they are offering. But yes, I think another thing to take a look at, and excuse me, you were still on.
I was just asking about her biggest mistake.
Biggest mistake, yeah. The governor sets the tone, and our leader sets the tone. And in some of her commercials and part of what she's been putting out in response to some of those national polls and surveys, that Iowa's #1. Iowa's a great state, but there are areas where we have started to fall short. Education, there's been some rankings that have shown us, one group gave us a grade of a C or C+. Not acknowledging that we have some challenges. Iowans expect excellence. We expect excellence in education. and there are some disparities that are happening in communities of color and other groups in K-12 education, and so not acknowledging some of those disparities and disproportionate representation, overrepresentation of African American youth in terms of special ed or some other areas. We can't ignore those. We and Iowans expect excellence, and that's missed opportunity when we don't acknowledge and recognize the challenges that we have. We can overcome them. We've got innovators in the state of Iowa. We've got innovation in healthcare, and so let's acknowledge some challenges. Let's free up some of the professionals and the public in those areas to come together to come up with some solutions that'll create opportunities for all of us.
Since we've been talking about education, let's go broad here a little bit. What is your vision for education in Iowa, and what would be the first steps if you were governor toward realizing that goal?
The first step is trying to get our arms around revenue. Because it is education is a budget item. So reining in some of the corporate tax breaks is one portion. When I was on mayor and on city council in Iowa City, what we tried to do with our corporate tax breaks was to make them short to medium term, to ask those questions, to look at what are we getting in return. Iowa City, I inherited a AAA bond rating, the highest for cities from Moody's that they can have, and throughout my tenure, and they continue to this day. So that shows that we we were responsible with the books. We made responsible tax incentives when we gave them out, but we also projected. Cities are required to do one-year budgeting. We did 3-year budgeting. We did 5-year capital planning. So we showed that we were able to plan. So part of that planning involves fully funding K-12 education, again looking at the revenue side in terms of the tax breaks that were given out, ideally we've got teachers that are measuring for growth and teaching for growth as opposed to teaching towards standardized tests. Teachers aren't having to pull money out of their pocket to buy calculators for. GoFundMe shouldn't be a primary source of our education system. We've got a pre-K funded, so that young people are ready to learn when they arrive at school. They're not hungry when they're there. We've got partnerships between our private nonprofit human service agencies working with our school boards and teachers to make sure that those support services, so it's not just a matter of the state government funding education, but pulling resources and people with in areas that have the support services, so that we've got before and after school opportunities for young people. And it's we mentioned STEM, which is great, but STEM is not the end-all be-all. There are great musicians that have come up through this state. There are great artists. There are great writers. And so we need to recognize, teaching towards growth, but also allowing exploration of interest and skills, not just in athletics and not just in the STEM courses, but the other arts that are out there.
Those sound like steps toward a goal, but what exactly would be your overall goal for education in Iowa? I mean, you want to get back to
first in the nation.
one?
First in the nation.
Okay.
Iowans expect excellence, and we've been there, and we can do that again.
Okay.
We can't get there again by eroding the revenue base for government, for school districts. We can't get there by not returning the right of educators and other unions, public unions, to collectively bargain, so that they are, being supported at a level that they are being recognized by our state government, that we want excellence out of them. We want them to work for excellence out of young people to create that opportunity. And so, those are all components of becoming not number one. It's not just the classroom, it's the other supports around.
How would
around the
you
classroom.
measure what's number one? Is that NAEP scores? Is it ACT? You mentioned not teaching to the test, yet that's the yardstick lots of people use for excellence in education.
I'm not saying to do away with them, but to acknowledge and when we're looking for accountability, to build in some of those measures, some of those classroom measures that many and some of the larger cities that teachers are doing to measure for growth, and are there ways to incentivize growth. There's always talk about trying to evaluate teachers on those ACT type scores, but are there ways to incentivize and acknowledge those opportunities for growth? So I'm not an expert in measurement, but we've got expertise out there to working with the Department of Education, to work with our education associations to try and help us set the standard and set the bar.
Do you think there should be more room in Iowa for what advocates would call education choice?
I support public dollars for public education. There are some of the faith-based schools, for example, that they are required, if they've got a young person who is receiving services under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, that they're required to provide those special ed type services. If they've got a young person, they're required to work with the area education agencies, for example. But some of the home schools and things like that, those opportunities exist in the state right now. But by not using public dollars towards public education, we are eroding the resources for something that is there to benefit the public.
Employers say the biggest barrier to growth and expansion in Iowa is a lack of skilled workforce. Do you agree? And if so, what do you do about that in particular?
Well, even when I was mayor of Iowa City and serving on the Iowa City Area Development Board of Directors and the Chamber of Commerce there, there was a recognition and by some of the employers coming in that we need folks in the trades, and even just supporting some of the industries, the wind industry that's come up. There's and that was back in the I got an office in 2012. Back around that time. So I do agree that we need to have plumbers and pipe fitters and electricians and welders and all of the trades. That's how our communities grow and sustain themselves. One example I gave earlier was just talking about post-secondary education and making that investment. I mean, some of our community colleges have some great trade programs, and so that Grow Iowa program, where after other forms of scholarships and grants, the state picks it up if you make the commitment to live here for 2 years. I think that's one way to go about getting that. And again, just elected officials and the governor's office, trying to use the bully pulpit to help create awareness about the opportunity, not just a 4-year college degree, but looking at 2-year and the trade programs.
Well, what about 4-year college degrees? Public universities are facing difficult decisions as state resources are shrinking. They're raising tuition, et cetera. And student debt is a problem in Iowa and across the country. So do 4-year universities need to restructure to better meet those workforce needs that we were just talking about? Or is it just a matter of increasing taxpayer support?
I think there's room for both. I mean, we always want to take a look at how efficiently we are operating. But I don't proceed from the assumption of some in the legislature that I've heard that there is waste, or the assumption that there's waste, or that the assumption that there's inefficiencies. I mean, I've worked at Iowa State Extension and Outreach under Iowa State, and there's continual review of what we were doing, how we were doing it. When I was at the University of Iowa as a visiting instructor, there were times then we were again looking at how how we were teaching, how we were using resources that we needed at the University of Iowa. I think the other thing that I want to bring up here is we do want to try and keep tuition affordable and low as possible. But a lot of times when talk comes to our public institutions or public universities, it's not just about keeping tuition low. Our universities provide services and support throughout rural and urban Iowa in terms of healthcare, in terms of agriculture, the Leopold Center and some of the programs that folks in our different agricultural field and businesses are doing, and education. So when you shortchange higher education, it's going to have an effect throughout Iowa with people of all ages, not just students.
Well, we could go a couple different ways with this, but
Sure.
let's talk about rural Iowa for a second. Since you brought that up, what do you see as the biggest concern when it comes to rural Iowa, and how do you look at revitalizing rural communities and small towns where the population's been emptying out to the urban areas?
Right. There are a lot of challenges in rural Iowa. One is more of a feeling thing, but I'll get into some practical things, that Des Moines has forgotten about them. They see investments being made in the urban centers. They see a lot of the roads and bridges and reconstruction happening along the I-80 corridor and development happening in the Des Moines area, and it's, what about us out here? And so I talked about restructuring, looking at tax incentives rather than the $20 million tagged along with the tax deferments, tax abatements for the Apple deal. What if we took $20 million and looked at incentivizing some development out in rural Iowa, some of the micropolitan areas? What if we made an investment in broadband so that people had an opportunity for small business out of their home? Well, and farmers are business people too, men and women farmers. We've got some women in ag programs going at Iowa State University Extension. What if we made those investments out there? We've got...
What kind of investments, though? Because, Democrats were talking a lot about that fertilizer plant down in southeast Iowa that Governor Branstad brought in with a significant amount of state tax incentives. And it did cause businesses, did well for businesses during the construction phase, et cetera. To the point that people down there felt like it was a good investment for the state. So what kind of investment are we talking about?
I'm talking small to medium-sized business. Every community can't have that large a facility. Every community can't have a you brought up ACT or Procter and Gamble, but every community has small to medium-sized business, and so if there's some type of tax breaks that can be given there, if there's some partnerships that could be developed and pulled together for small to medium-sized business, working in agriculture, we've got several of these microbreweries and wineries going around the state. Are there other creative niches like that could be incentivized? Rural housing and housing for the elderly. That's a challenge in some of those areas, and so there's some redevelopment opportunities in terms of using older buildings or older school, abandoned buildings or schools that some type of incentive or investment could be brought there, so that both seniors and any graduating seniors that are wanting to stay in the community, that there's some or someone wanting to return to the state or returning to their hometown, that there's those type of housing options that are available and out there.
If the president's tariffs stifle agricultural trade. The state could be headed for more economic stagnation, turmoil. We've already seen several years of flat revenue growth. So you've got a lot of plans that cost money. If you're governor, what do you do to make sure that you can balance the budget, which is required by state law, while still meeting some of these priorities?
That's a huge challenge, and it goes back to, again, electing people to Congress that are going to challenge the president when he legislates by tweet and impulse. The markets, both international and here in the country, like stability, and any whims that the president may throw out there certainly can affect affect the markets. I think the other thing that we need to take a look at, just trying to help diversify agriculture so that we are not so reliant on the commodities market. I support the something that was done. I support the bill that came through the legislature on industrial hemp. Those are some opportunities in terms of textiles, in terms of food product. If I remember right, hemp seed is high in protein. So trying to look at other types of commodities and markets for our farmer. Trying to work against the Environmental Protection Agency looking at rolling back the CAFE standards. That's certainly going to hurt biofuel efforts here in the state, and it's going to have be detrimental to the environment. In 2007, I signed the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, where we mayors across the country signed that. Many just signed it to sign a proclamation to set a goal of reducing the city's carbon footprint by 80% by 2025. Well, when I did it, I said, what can I worked with our city manager and staff, said, let's make this real. What can we do? We changed some practices in terms of how we cool and heat the buildings. We established an Eastside Recycling Center. That was a partnership with Habitat Restore and Friends of Historic Preservation. It's a demonstration educational site, I think LEED Platinum certified. We ended up purchasing a sand quarry that could have gone in the private market, become a gated community, and now that's the True Blood Center, park and lake in Iowa City. Now it's a generational opportunity, but looking at some environmental practices and trying to back to those commodity markets. It's going to take a multi-tiered effort.
Are there other programs or spending in the budget that you consider wasteful? You said you didn't think there was generally waste and inefficiency in higher education, but how do you go about balancing the budget in years of declining revenue without cutting any spending?
In terms of state level government, I think part of it's going to involve looking at some strategic planning, and with all the departments and department heads to take a look at where we want to go, what we want to emphasize, ways to collaborate. There may be other ways to collaborate in terms of mental health and mental illness. Department of Education, Public Health, Corrections, all in some way, shape, or form are interfacing, seeing that mental health services and supports are being done well. Can we bring those groups together to do that type of where they are using professionals in common or resources support? So trying to get creative with strategic planning is one way to go about looking at that. We ask that of our universities. I think another way, again, this is getting at just trying to capture or recapture some revenue. I talked about rolling back some of the tax breaks. We ask, meaning government asks for reviews in certain areas in terms of looking for waste or whether we're being effective. What about doing a review every 2 or 3 years on some of the tax incentives that have been given out? Are we getting the return on the investment? That's, again, a practice at trying to be accountable and look at what we're doing, but also looking at some other revenue tax items, the federal deductibility. For years, Democrats have been advocating for getting rid of that. It tends to benefit folks who are on the wealthier end, and not low to moderate folks who are unable to take care of that. Now, it's a unique year with the federal government dropping the tax that rose, but taking a look at some type of balance between that and personal income tax to try and make a net zero revenue effect for the state budget.
Part of the tax discussion at the Capitol this year is modernizing the sales tax, which includes adding tax or working to collect tax on more online sales, services, things like Uber and Lyft, things like your streaming services, Google Play, those kinds of things. Do you generally support that approach that the legislature is taking? Are there things that you would not want to add sales tax to as far as digital services at this point?
I think interstate commerce is an area that, and I'm not sure, or I'm not sure at this point if there's some things that need to happen on the federal to clarify the law in terms of some permissions for states to do that. I'm not a tax expert. I just don't know. But from my understanding, and an interest of mine would be willing to take a look at some of that interstate internet sales to try and capture some of that. And that will take some of the pressure off of Iowa-based companies and Iowa-based businesses, or at least a physical place of commerce here in the state, which then helps support jobs for the public if we've got folks here.
There's a constitutional amendment on the books that would allow any increase in the sales tax, that 3/8 of a penny would go toward environmental and services and outdoor recreation. Would you propose raising the sales tax to make sure that Iowa collects that money for the environment?
The people have already spoken on that when that constitutional question came up on the ballot. I think it was 62.99 or something like that percent. It hasn't been funded for the natural resources and outdoor recreation fund. I would support and try and promote recapturing that, or capturing that 3/8 of a penny to support some of the environmental features. I think also Democrats rightly so have a concern about sales tax being regressive. There are some ways we can take a look, some other, whether it's earned income tax, or to try and mitigate that, and then obviously some necessary things like food and those things wouldn't be taxed. But I have some relatives that live in Flint, Michigan, and I can guarantee you that they would have been willing to pay 3/8 of a penny tax to have clean water. So a targeted, functional, useful sales tax that is going to benefit the public, especially low to moderate income folks, I would support.
Would you be willing to raise the sales tax higher than 3/8 of a penny to address other priorities? There's been some suggestion that you raise it a penny and put the 3/8 toward the environment, but then include some of the other revenue for mental health or other priorities. Is that a good idea? And if so, what other priorities would you fund?
I'd be willing to take a look at that. Again, a focus on concern on how it's going to affect low to moderate income folks, and what services or supports are we looking at trying to supplement. The some other possibilities it's been thrown out by someone who's no longer running about legalizing marijuana. I'm not at that point for recreational use, but I do support the use of medical marijuana. My mother died of cancer and could have benefited from the pain management, but any revenue that potentially could come from that being grown here, medical marijuana here in Iowa, would be something I think down the road to take a look at. But I think even some of the supports that we have for some of our infrastructure, in terms of, I'm spacing on the name, the funding for roads and bridges.
Road use tax.
Road use tax, thank you. Because I was thinking that there's another, there was another fund that came across that to help support that. Being willing to take a look and review, that's always a challenge, but to review the equation to see how we're allocating, that part of the budget towards roads, bridges. Do we need to emphasize bridges one year? I did RAGBRAI the last few years, and a lot of the roads out in the rural areas and bridges are in poor shape. So again, I think part of it is just a review of all of our revenue sources to try and take a look at where we can capture revenue before looking at going above the 3/8 of a penny. But it's, again, the similar analogy I gave to my relatives in Flint being willing to pay 3/8 of a penny for clean water. What is it we would be doing with that? Is it education? Is it mental health services? And those would be the types of things, were I to agree with that I would want to utilize that revenue for.
I have just a couple more questions, but I just want to make sure we don't have any questions in the room here as we start to wrap up. Okay. Let's go back to politics for a second. What sets you apart? What really sets you apart from the other governor candidates in the primary race? Is it mostly background, and personal history, or do you have some disagreements on policy with your fellow candidates?
I think the primary thing is background and experiences, and but it's more the breadth of the experience, the variety of experience, and I mean, we're the sum of our experiences, and those experiences help inform how we make decisions. They help inform our approach and choices we make in resolving problems, but also setting vision. Education is big. Now, I've not been a K-12 teacher, but I was in the environment and working with teachers. I also investigated claims of discrimination and sexual harassment. People that were involved in those grievance procedures with me would tell you they didn't always agree with my decision, but they felt that they were heard, they were listened to, and that I was fair. And I think that's an additional experience. I think also about my background, I have lived in Davenport, I've lived in Iowa City, and I've lived in Ames. So, just three different sides and three different types of places in the state of Iowa. I've served in the military, and I've got family members that are in the military. My brother served in Desert Storm. I've got a niece that's in the military. My great-great-grandfather served in the colored troops in the Civil War. So that type of service and support has been important to my family. But just that awareness of how families and individuals are affected when their loved ones are deployed and the support they need when they come back. I've worked in higher education. I'm working for Extension and Outreach, and it's been an education for me in learning more about rural Iowa and agricultural life. Although I did have some experience with that as a youth counselor. I did substance abuse prevention work in 5 counties in Iowa, and and even just to put it out there, those experiences not only for me but for others. Several young people that I worked with, I'm African American. Several young people I worked with, I was the first black person that they had ever seen. Some would ask, and they would kind of look, and I had hair then, but they would ask, could they touch my hair? And so all of those things, again, our experiences help and shape our decision making and our experiences and our really ability to relate and to hear folks. This is an important one for me. I mean, I have been elected to office 3 times successfully. I served in an executive role as an elected official, mayor of Iowa City. I knew how to make a controversial decision, to research, to listen to the public, and then to have to face your neighbors in the community the next day. Some people, I've seen the Secretary of State's youth vote, and I apparently was fourth place ahead of Nate Boulton, the head of McGuire, and just some of the banter that goes on that you see online about that. But where I'm going with that is that I think there is a sense of concern, but also a sense of hope about someone that interacts with folks a little differently. As an elected official, there were times when the public would be angry with me because an issue would come up and we would set a public hearing and they want to know my firm commitment. And I'd say, well, we haven't had the public hearing yet. So just being in a position where I've had to gather all the input and make an informed decision based on my values is an experience that I think I have more of than others, as well as private, nonprofit, human services, and all that.
You mentioned being African American, and you are the only African American in the race. If you won, you would be Iowa's first African American governor. What does that mean to you, and what do you think that means to Iowa?
I'll start with Iowa first. Similar to when I was the first African American mayor of Iowa City in the year 2006. For some people, they'll say, well, we're not in the, it's the present, we're not living in the past, we're all the same, it shouldn't matter. For some folks, it won't matter. For other folks, it will be important for them, in some cases symbolic, because we are in the year 2018. For other folks, it's that role model type of thing, whether it's people of color or anyone who looks different than past governors of the state of Iowa. Kind of that aspirational thing, the awareness that, that's a possibility, that there's someone that looks like me. I had role models when I was a young person. Roy Coleman was an African American police officer. Jesse Perez was Latino police officer. I used to be part of the police cadets when I was in middle school, and he would spend time with a group of us young people. Officer Perez would. The fact that I've had teachers and just that awareness that someone like me can do something. So it's the possibilities, I think, is what that means for those that it's important to. I think for me personally, let me tell the story this way. Before I was mayor of Iowa City, I was on city council, and in the back of the city council chambers was a wall of pictures of all of the mayors of Iowa, past mayors of Iowa City. Most men, just a few women. But all, at least visibly, were not people of color. And so it was almost as a sense of I was in a position to try. And there are certainly people more charismatic than me, there are people more intelligent than me, the people that have been involved in politics, but they haven't run for some reason. And so if my running can have meaning for some folks and show that it's important for my community to get involved in community, because that was instilled with me, being told that you can't or that you won't get elected. Well, we don't know unless we try, and if I'm in a position where I can take the time to try and do that, to raise issues like human trafficking that's going on in the state, some of the disproportionate representation that's gone in the state, but also to show that I'm interested and knowledgeable about clean air and clean water and the economy, that I'm knowledgeable about those two, can be aspirational, inspirational, and if in any way, shape, or form that is beneficial for one young woman or one young man out there, then it's worth my time to show that. And I mentioned the youth vote earlier because people were surprised that I get John Norris and I went back and forth between third and fourth there. But I got a note on Facebook from a young man. Well, he's not so young anymore, but he had said he heard that I was running, and it was actually someone that I'd been a counselor for when he was a young person. He was saying that he had some tough times and had some dark times as a young adult. But he said that just his involvement with me, even if it was just a voice, an ear to listen, that and the encouragement I tried to give him stuck with him all the way through those tough times. And now as an adult, he's doing pretty well. And so those are the types of messages that I hear from young people, and young people of all different backgrounds, races, and citizenship or not. Again, if my running has that effect on folks, then if I'm successful, again, not a primary reason that I would be running for governor. In fact, this is probably the first time I've really kind of talked about it publicly here, at least within the editorial board or the press. But if me being the 44th governor of Iowa and an African American can have that type of symbolic meaning for folks, then that's important to me.
What is your path to the Democratic nomination? You mentioned kind of battling it out for fourth place in a youth straw poll, but the fact is, 3 of your competitors raised over $1 million last year. You didn't break 10,000 in that first test, and it's it's a crowded field. So I mean, what do you see as your path to the nomination?
Yeah. I don't know if you remember former Representative Shirley Chisholm of New York faced some Democratic challengers, and her slogan, this is not my slogan, but her slogan, if I remember right, was unbought and unbossed. And she just plugged away and kept talking to folks, and I try and, for every commercial that someone's able to run, I have to physically be, 20 other places and then some. And just trying to rely upon my connections, not just now, but connections that I've had as a professional and personally with folks, whether it's with the school districts or, I met with some folks who were in a cycling club. I've been an avid cycler, so just personal and professional relationships, one-on-one conversations. Whether I speak to a group of 5 or 75, heads are nodding as I'm talking, and people have come up to me and said, I'm there with you, or you just made this hard for me. Just listening to your answers and how you carry yourself, you're in my top 2 or 3. And I figure that's a good place to be. And anything can happen. Straw polls are straw polls. You can take some meaning out of them. Others, depends on who paid for the poll. But certainly money helps with access. I just have to grind it out and work harder, and anything can happen.
Okay. Again, any other questions?
How far would you expand medical marijuana use in Iowa?
Medical?
Yes.
Let's see. I mean, even just to start here, I mean, to increase the percentage of THC is a start. But working with the medical professionals here in Iowa to take a look at conditions. I mean, certainly I mentioned cancer. My mother died of cancer. My father died of Alzheimer's. But there was a period of about 3 weeks where the folks in the nurses in the nursing home were wondering why the doctor was waiting to prescribe an opioid for pain management, pain relief, and comfort. I think it's some of those pain management as well as clearly terminal, but some areas in terms of pain management or some of the success that, and some of it's anecdotal in terms of folks with seizures, that type of thing, but someone being able to sleep after so many years of not, I mean, that means something. And so I think research is going to have to be continue to be done to help inform the level of that medical, but I think looking for leadership from our medical professionals so that it's not getting into the recreational. The reason I mentioned the hesitancy about recreational, because some of the younger folks especially have talked to me about recreational, and I say, we've got people that are hurting now. We've got people that are dying of cancer now. We've got people with terminal illnesses or just pain management. But I'm also, I'm a group fitness instructor on the side too, and so other forms of of wellness and pain management that are not that are not involving marijuana, or they're more kind of holistic type of things. I'm open to try and work with the medical professionals to do that, but I think research is going to dictate so that it doesn't get to that point where, okay, now we're really talking about recreational use. Some of the states that do it, they'll try and, in terms of like operating a motor vehicle while impaired, the test for alcohol is not the same. That's not going to work with marijuana. So there's some logistical things about that. But I've been in some construction situations, areas where I've worked, where someone was clearly high on had been smoking marijuana and rolled a dump truck. Ended up being okay in the end, but it's that concern about impairment and some potential negative consequences that way. That's so it's, I think part of it's a research and learning process, but I'm willing to tap into the potential that's there.
Do you think Iowa should have term limits for governors?
I've always been, historically, I've been an advocate of the public makes the decision, and it's the obligation of those that are running for public office to try and make that case to the voters to make that choice. The reason that I would could potentially lean towards term limits is because of campaign finance and campaign finance reform. If we can't make greater strides nationally with campaign finance reform, then then term limit for governor would be something that I would be willing to support. But hopefully we can make some strides against, at the federal level, against some of the campaign finance challenges, because big money, it does sway things. It is a big influence, as we all know, and it can help limit exposure for candidates that don't have a lot of money. I will say, some of my friends that did support Senator Bernie Sanders and his $27 and whatever it was, way before Bernie, when I was running for city council in Iowa City, there were no limits, but I had a self-imposed limit of $50 per primary and governor. So I have a history of having
for donor.
For donor. From each, 50 for primary, 50 for the general election, and we did that because I have a concern about and a historical concern about how money can influence just the election process.
Are you doing that in the gubernatorial campaign?
Our budget is so small that it's not really an issue right now. I was initially thinking about that, but primarily just looking at not taking corporate and we've not been offered from any of the lobbying groups, and some of it I get. I mean, if the background of some of the folks, it makes sense. There's a logical connection from the interest group that they're getting that, and so I, again, because of my background and experiences, I come from a variety of different areas, and some of those are groups that there's just not a lot of funding for. There's not a lot of funding lobbyists for working against human trafficking, and we'll see where the gun, sensible gun ownership group is able to do in terms of their influence, and there's not, that's a big, working against the NRA is a big thing, and I do believe in that we can honor the Second Amendment and still have sensible, responsible gun ownership.
Go ahead.
Oh, we talked about the 3/8 penny sales tax increase, but is that enough? Do we need to raise taxes more in Iowa to meet our revenue needs?
Well, the target of that is related to natural resources, outdoor education, and
You
so
talk about many needs beyond that.
Right.
So do we need to raise taxes in Iowa?
I think we need to take a look at some taxes. There's the inheritance tax. I mean, there's only a few folks there's already some opportunities where the children are not going to be are not going to have to pay tax on their inheritance. But there's some other areas where you know the revenue, the property is going to be wealthier folks, and so that's something that I think could take a look at. Otherwise, part of that strategic planning process is take a look at our revenue needs, what services we're going to be able to do and cannot do, where can we have public-private partnerships, even just the land trust one. That 3/8 of a penny is not a lot to take care of, some of the natural resources needs. However, there are current, private entities that are doing that. I went last week to the 40th anniversary of the Burr Oak Land Trust folks, and they are dedicating, their land to that conservation. And so just that 3/8 of a penny can be matched. I mean, they're ready and prepared to help provide matching funds to make some progress in those areas. So that's a different type of public-private partnership, but again, trying to look at some other areas where we can scrimp and save where we can to apply, and then, if necessary, raise revenue, whether it's that that increase in getting rid of the estate tax or looking at some other form of taxation.
We're coming up on our hour here, but I want to give you the last word. Why should the Des Moines Register endorse you?
I was thinking about this and talking with a friend of mine. We always say that there's a special election or it's an important election, but I believe, especially with the blue wave that's coming up, that people are looking for something different. They're looking for vision, and they're looking for us getting back to those opportunities for Iowans. And again, Iowans expect excellence. We're not liking the path that we're going with education. We don't like where we've been with mental health care. And so I was talking with a person about when Anderson got the Chicago Tribune's endorsement back 1980 presidential run. If the editorial board's looking at making a statement, if you're looking at making a statement about not just money, but message and the person, then I think the breadth of my experience would be something for you to consider. I would think that, again, looking at some of the different worthy special interest groups that we have, and some of my colleagues on the Democratic side have, if you're looking to make a statement about hope, about vision, about just your typical Iowan, then giving me an endorsement would be a pretty strong statement that way.
Right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity.
The 5 other candidates for governor and the 3 Democrats running in the contested primary for Iowa's 3rd congressional district are also scheduled to meet with Register editors and staff in the next few weeks. See DesMoinesRegister.com for the schedule. All those meetings will be live streamed also, and also for all the coverage of the primary race and Iowa politics. Thanks a lot.
All right.